Focus Chat. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios. And the topic for today is inspired by a question from one of our customers. And we thought that it's very interesting to discuss it. And in order to discuss it properly, I invited, as usual, Adi. Hello, Adi.
Hello, nice to be here.
Before we go into the topic, what else have you done since we last did one of these chats?
Yeah, so I'm part in this big digital transformation, and we are doing all sorts of things from organizing business on business value streams and starting with teams and with anything that goes, like starting from principles and making sure that we have enough capacity and move slowly towards delivering fast and more efficiently for the end user. That's in a phrase what I've been doing so far, mainly doing so far. But yeah, otherwise, of course, involved in the community and doing several different stuff like that.
We were kidding before that you had to join a steering committee.
Yes, of course. So I have and I will join. So that's an important aspect of this corporate life.
One of the reasons that we don't like steering committees is that they tend to block every decision instead of things moving fast. You have to go into a committee.
Well, a committee, any committee, in fact.
Have a long conversation, and maybe, just maybe, in a few months you manage to move forward.
Yeah, I think it's an excuse if you have a committee to say nobody has any responsibility. We are all responsible. These 30 people here. So then, yeah, of course, nobody's responsible. I'm not responsible, so it's our own fault if something goes wrong, and it's our and if something goes right, it's the boss's thing. But this is like the bad way of using a committee. Unfortunately, it happens way too often. I don't think it's always the case, but it's definitely way too often that these things happen.
Yeah, of course, sometimes you need a group decision on things, especially if you need to move things faster on multiple areas. You need to bring people together and decide. But often what we've seen happening is things get stuck instead of moving forward.
Yeah.
Not always, but
there's this rule in politics, and in a corporate environment you have politics at a smaller level, but there's this rule in politics says that if you want to bury a topic, just form a committee. So maybe this is just some sort of wisdom created in politics that it's also shown in these types of environments.
Yeah, so if any executive is listening to this for advice, one thing you can do is dissolve or steering committees and see whether you are moving faster or not, or at least suspend them for a while.
Scary thoughts.
I know. Okay, so let's move now to the main topic. One of our friends who we worked with for a while has asked us a question, and the question is about planning release or delivery, let's say, perhaps not so long as a release. Maybe a release is every 6 months or so. We are talking more about the delivery in an agile context between multiple teams. So just to be clear, we're talking about, let's say, 3, 4, 5 teams who need to deliver pieces of functionality that go into a delivery. And these pieces of functionality would not take one sprint, to take 3, 4, 5 sprints, but not 6 months, not 12 months, just on a relatively short term, on a few sprints and with a few teams. And I I found this question very interesting. She was asking us how to deal with this in her organization. And I found this question very interesting because I've met this situation often, and I think it's better talking about it. Have you seen this in practice?
Yes, definitely. In any big organization, at one moment you'll need to have this. But let's say that this is a situation that sometimes happens when you don't have very well structured value streams, I think. Because if you'd have a value stream that is well structured with a smaller team, they will make the planning for their own thing, and maybe you'll have some kind of alignment on objectives in between these teams. So typically it happens when you have a far bigger scope than you need to have, and typically during transformations. But still you need to work like that. You need to progress, and you need to deliver some sort of value. And there are more ways. The one that I have used mostly is when you start with the business needs, and the product owners start discussing about what they'd like to have there. We have some sort of workshop on business prioritization, where I typically facilitate with those very beautiful ideas of business value, that any of the features should bring money, should save money, should make money, or protect money. And we need to look at these three aspects. And after we prioritize everything from there, we start understanding which one of the teams is better fit to do that type of work. Because during a transformation, you don't have necessarily expertise that is broad or extended along the organization. So then even if, let's say, you wouldn't like to have this dependency, you do have dependency on knowledge. So you'd say, if you really want to finish this on time, that team needs to work on it, or that person in that team needs to work on it, because it's the only one who knows, or it's just that person and the other, and you need to choose between two teams from four or something like that. So then the teams start looking from this point of view, and then there are open topics which anyone can do, and then with those ones you balance the load from the teams. And you have this roadmap, and then you follow it, basically.
So this is one solution that I've heard. And it's better if we discuss a bit more what would be the ideal case in Agile, because I think many people who are familiar with Agile or are very interested in this domain, they know that the ideal case is when you have teams that are able to deliver independently a piece of functionality that helps a user or the business somehow, and they do it completely independently because the structure of the team is cross-functional. So they have all the necessary roles, all the necessary skills, all the necessary knowledge, all the necessary tools that allow them to do this. Now, unfortunately, so this would be the ideal case. This also implies that you have the type of person in the team who is not expert on one thing, but is able to play multiple different roles. So for example, you might have a person who is able to write code for iOS and for Android and for backend. Not necessarily in the same at the same level of expertise, but able to do this. Now, often when we start a transformation, we don't have this kind of people, because we start this transformation with people who are already there, who tend to be very specialized in one domain. They are either, backend specialists, and sometimes even more than just backend. They are specialists in one system from the enterprise, and they know how to work within the system. But when you take them out of that, it's very hard for them to actually produce anything. So because of this, if you want to reach the ideal stage, one step is to form the teams accordingly so that you have this cross-functional style of teams. But then there's a period of transition when people learn from each other, and then they step up into different areas. And as you mentioned, sometimes it's not even possible to do that. For example, I've worked with companies who are doing hardware and software. Building hardware implies, on one hand, building the actual, so designing the circuits and all that. But then once you print the circuits, you need to do some kind of programmable hardware, which is very assembly-like in the way you write the code. And that is a very specialized skill. And then you build on top of this, and you go to things like software and firmware, and the software that sits on top of the firmware that gives you a nice interface for management and so on. And it's not realistic to expect the people who are writing, web-based code for the management interface of the device to be able to also write low-level hardware code. Perhaps they will learn, but it is a very, very difficult thing to learn. It's two completely different worlds.
So there are always skills in any organization that are very complicated. There, where you require a lot of years to become just aware of what's there, and there are these really interesting skills like hardware architect, where you basically know types of circuits and which ones work with other circuits, depending on looking also on cost, which is very important, and knowing also how to negotiate stocks. And because when you build hardware, you don't build 2 items, you build millions of items. So you look at hardware, you look at their architecture, compatibility, versioning, and so on. This is extremely difficult. You couldn't expect such a person to start then learning how to write assembly as well. It's already very difficult. Yeah. That's just one example, but there are many roles like this.
Yeah, and then some of those roles are also because of the legacy. Some enterprises have like 5 different CRMs, which are proprietary.
Yeah.
And they have their own proprietary language, and people have gone through trainings in order to be able to write code for that particular CRM. And so it's quite complicated. And CRM is just an example. It can be ERP, it can be invoicing, it can be middleware, it can be all kinds of systems like this that have been very useful, but that are not fit for an agile technical architecture, because they are very hard to change, very hard to test, often don't provide an API that you can call, and so on.
Yeah.
So there are all these kinds of situations that make more complex the context of every large company. And I would have to say that until about 10 years ago, I would have said that it's perfectly fine for a developer to be full stack and to develop everything from database and backend and front end and so on. But then in the past years, the front end has become so complicated, especially on web, and plus you have front ends on mobile. So expecting somebody to know all the different, React, JS, and plugins for React and small libraries and iOS and Android, and it has become very, very difficult to keep up with all this.
Yeah.
So I think the reality is that we won't have, especially in this complex context, we won't have full stack developers unless, well, we can move in the direction of this ideal, but it will be very, very difficult to do.
Yeah,
so.
that's why typically I talk about T-shaped individuals. So you're very good at something, and maybe if you can, you'll learn, or you are able to do something else as a secondary or tertiary skill, and it can be anything, because let's face it, you don't need just the skill of programming or architecture. You also need the skill of testing or the skill of analysis, and you don't need to forget about this. Quite often when you look at traditional organizations, you do have these very specific roles of analyst, business analyst, technical analyst, coder, tester, automated tester, and so on. So looking at some sort of environment, I think you should be able to learn more or less about all of them, and in this way you will be able to improve the flow of the team and diminish more and more the blockages or the wait times that you have.
Yes, and so going back to the team structure, what I've seen happening in practice in large organizations where I worked is that you have, even if you define a kind of a value flow for your business, and on a value flow you create cross-functional teams that can work the value flow, you will often have dependencies between the teams, because you will have a team that does the API services and so on that expose the internal infrastructure of the organization, and you'll have teams that face the users and create products that are user-facing. And by user-facing, of course, the other teams also have users, but their users are the developers from the other team. So you always have a user, but in the case of the top level, let's say, teams, they are working with the customers of the organization often. So with this being said, what you have is this pattern of a team chain. You have a chain of teams. Ideally, you would have only two, but often, and particularly during a transition, you may have 4 or 5 different teams.
Yeah.
In order to deliver a larger feature or larger flow that helps a user, you need to go put together 5 teams, and 3 of them need to develop stuff that is behind the scenes, and 2 of them develop the, let's say, user side, user facing or customer facing type of product.
Yeah.
So this is the context, and this is why it happens.
Yes, and in this situation, you can have a few approaches, but probably the best one is to look at analyze more in the beginning and look at everything that you need for that business enhancement, feature, epic, story, depends, whatever you want to call it, and make sure that whoever is the team that you based upon, so if let's say it's a middleware team or another core system where you need to make developments, make sure that team has capacity for you. And quite often this leads to telling them quite in advance that, hey, we'll need time from you 2-3 months ahead. We'll need time from you to do this in that moment, and we'll block it, which sounds not at all agile, but after all, the purpose is to deliver constant value. And if this is a transient state of the organization, that's what you need to do. and then it changes like that. So if you have 3-4 teams like that in a chain, you need to look, we need some time from you, then we need some time from you, and so on, until you are sure that all the dependencies are solved.
Yeah, and I think there are a few things worth saying within this context. One of them is that SAFe has a solution for this, and that is called PI planning.
Yes, I
Now,
don't like it, but it exists.
yeah,
Yes.
it exists. I don't like it either, and the reason we don't like SAFe very much is because SAFe tends to avoid forcing you to change anything in the organization. You just introduce a lot of roles, a lot of bureaucracy. It doesn't look like agility to me. Agility is supposed to be when you have a context like this, when you have multiple teams who need to coordinate in some way. The solution in Agile is to do the same thing that you do at the level of a team, which is collaborate. You collaborate, find ways to collaborate between the teams so that you can make this happen, right? But it's not introducing more bureaucracy, more documents, more roles, and so on. So we are not very keen on the solution, on the SAFe style of doing it.
It feels like you don't want to maximize the amount of work not done. You don't want to minimize the overhead. You want to keep it or even make it bigger, and then after a while you kind of get used to it. That's what SAFe feels to me.
Yeah. So if you are using SAFe, fine, but I wouldn't advise it. One thing that's also another solution that you can use here is to use user story mapping to visualize, particularly if you have a more complex flow that you need to implement. You visualize this flow from the point of view of the user and the user experience, and then you go and cut and say, these are the increments that we need. And based on the increments that you need, you work with the teams to figure out, okay, which team needs to do what for that particular increment. And I think with all these solutions, there is still a problem of coordination. Because let's say you negotiate, you come up to an agreement, this is what the middleware team will do, this is what the end user team will do, and so on. But sometimes, some things work faster than others, right? So it is very much possible that the middleware team will finish something very quickly, or we finish something very slowly in comparison to the UI team. So perhaps for the UI, you need something from the middleware, but they haven't yet provided. Or the other way around, they don't have anything else to do because they finish faster, and they could create some more features, but then the question is, who is using them, and when will the user-facing team catch up with them?
Yeah.
So these are a few common challenges. What do you do in this case?
Well, I typically I use both. So the thing that I mentioned in the beginning with user story mapping, but starting with user story mapping. But let's say that I wouldn't do user story mapping just for this. I do it for a broader purpose, to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing. Because way too often you're just somewhere in the middle of, or in a corner of a system, and you just know that you need to pass data from there to there, but you need to get out of it in a way to understand what we're doing and how we're helping our users, our customers, and then it's clearer why you do what you do. So that's one of the main purposes for user story mapping. And then, of course, on the business side, on the product owner side or on the prioritization and planning side, you start using the same result of the user story map, and you start looking at it from this point of view of dependencies, and it's a lot easier to understand them because you already have pieces that are manageable and they are easier to be analyzed by the people in the team.
Okay. Yeah, so going back to these challenges of synchronization, how do you deal with
the
people
synchronization?
finishing faster or slower?
That's difficult typically. So this is really project management. It's nothing. If you're skilled in project management, you'll be able to do that. If not, try to find a good project manager. But what I would hope is that sprint after sprint or year after year, you'll have less and less coordination because you start changing the ecosystem. This type of coordination is not necessarily bringing any value, and quite on the opposite, it can hinder some developments, some types of business developments towards the users and customers. But otherwise, it's just project management, looking at everyone. Are we on time? Are we aligned? When will you be on time? Let's have a discussion on the timeline. Let's look on the roadmap. Let's see what are your challenges? How can we help you move faster? Someone is sick. What can we do? Who can take this thing to move faster or to take it from here? All these things need to be addressed. So you need to be on watch every day on everything that's going on in order to make sure that you don't have a misalignment.
So I think there are a few options that don't involve project managers. They are related to project management, but don't involve a person looking at the coordination. One of them is having daily or twice a week scrum of scrums between these teams, because this will help you coordinate and reorganize your work so that you can actually coordinate between each other and also reach the goals that you set for the delivery.
Yes, sure. With teams that are more inclined to respect and to be transparent, it works. With teams that don't, you still need project management. And like the type of project management where you really stalk everyone to ask how are we on the timeline of the roadmap. It depends a lot on the organization. And the problem is that on one hand, you need to do that in order to move along, but on the other hand, it doesn't bring the good vibe to the whole transformation. It's just plain old project management. So that's why I would hope that this is just something temporary and just transient. Even like the scrum of scrums is overhead. So if we could avoid it by having very clear business streams, that's a lot better. And we can minimize this overhead.
Yeah, business streams and cross-functional teams on
exactly.
those business streams.
Yes.
Because that is the biggest challenge.
Yes, so that's the goal where you want to go. Now, if in between you need to do all these things to take these compromises, make sure that they're not like the temporary solution that became permanent. That's important.
Yeah, so the goal is to remove as much of an external coordinator.
Yes.
The team should be able to discuss between themselves, collaborate, and figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And reorganize like a scrum from Raby, right? Organize in the right direction.
Yes.
Another thing that I think is worth mentioning, we often, with teams that are starting with Agile or are very in the beginning of their transition and of their journey, there's often this constraint that they put on themselves, which is not real. The constraint that you have to deliver first everything from middleware before we can actually do anything in the UI. So you kind of go from bottom up development. And that is not necessarily needed. You don't have to have this type of dependency. You can break this dependency very easily because you discuss between the technical people of the user-facing application, the technical people of middleware, you define an API, and it doesn't have to be everything that you will need for the whole delivery, but just what you will need for the next sprint, for example, or for the next 2 sprints. You define the rules for that API, what we call the contract of the API. And then sometimes the team that is building the APIs, they first build a mock prototype, something that you can call and get some hard-coded values.
Yeah,
that's a very simple thing to do and very, very useful. And then you can develop your UI. You are completely independent from one another. You don't have to wait for everything to come to you before you can actually start developing.
Yeah, so you discuss on the interface, on the contract, and then you can parallelize work, basically. That's the idea.
Yeah, and you break this dependency. And one important thing, of course, if the team developing the API discovers something during the development and figures out, oh, we need to change something in the contract that we discussed initially, they need to let you know as soon as they learn about it, because otherwise you will start diverging, and that's not great. And the simple way of thinking of it is they are breaching the contract. Right?
Exactly.
You sign the contract in the beginning, you said this is what we expect from each other, and then they change something in the contract, that's a breach of contract. You need to renegotiate. Or at least know that there is a change. But this is one thing that's very simple to do. And another thing that's different in an agile development environment is that you start from the user side of things and not from the technical side of things. So it's actually much better if you define the API based on your requirements from the user-facing applications and not the other way around. Right?
That's like let's say a novelty for some organizations who would start with a database, but I think you need to start looking at vertical slices that you can deliver to your user, no matter how. So of course sometimes these vertical slices, meaning a bit of UI, a bit of middle layer, a bit of core systems and so on, but these slices sometimes are very deep. So that's where in a way you need to, especially in organizations with older architecture, you need to make sure that you will do some moves before having this vertical slice. And that's maybe the difficulty of understanding what you can do, what is possible. But again, on the long term, you still need to have a strategy of improving the architecture so you can have a real vertical slice. Now, this isn't something that will take a few months, probably will take years, but you need to start somehow, from somewhere, at some moment, and the sooner you start, the better. And in a way, bad architecture or old architecture or rigid architecture will make your development, your agile development, more difficult or sometimes even impossible from the ideas of fast feedback and fast time to market.
Yeah. Okay, so we discussed a lot about the various less ideal cases. Now, if you are talking about the ideal case, you have a business value stream that is well defined. You have cross-functional teams that can deliver independently. The product owner or the product owners come with a few features or a new flow or something that you need to implement for the next delivery. You know that the delivery will take 3-4 sprints. But then things are very easy because you put things visually together. I would still recommend the user story map because that's
it's really useful. Really useful.
It's very useful. It serves both as context from the user's point of view, understanding what users need and why and how they interact with the system, but it also serves as progress.
Mm-hmm.
You can check things on the user story map and you'll see how far you are on your road. And it also serves as a planning tool. So it's quite extremely useful tool. So you have this, you bring the 3-4 teams together because they can work independently. They will negotiate or however they do, they pick their work for the next sprint or sprints and they work on that. They look at their impediments, they fix their impediments because that's what Scrum Masters are supposed to do and the whole team if it's mature enough in agility. And this is how the synchronization is not necessarily even something official or formal, is something that naturally happens between people from the team because they like to work with each other and they talk to each other. Right? You don't necessarily have to have a special meeting to discuss where you are and what's happening.
Yes,
if something
definitely
will go slower, somebody will find out that the thing is going slower because they have coffee together.
Yeah. Or they just have it's a natural way of chatting or discussing. Now we are remote and it's more difficult to say we have coffee together in the same space, but I think good teams still have this urge, this need of briefly communicating effectively with each other on important points so that they always are more or less up to date with what's going on.
Yeah, they will post a message on a Slack channel or on a Microsoft Teams or whatever people are using and tell others, just not formally, but tell, okay, so I hit this problem and it's bugging me or it's slowing me down or and you are not afraid of saying this because you are in an environment that is psychologically safe and nobody will tell you, oh, why are you so slow? So that would be the ideal place. But we also, based on what we discussed, it's not always possible due to the challenges in big organizations, to various systems, to all the internal wiring that exists between tens or hundreds of systems. It's very hard impossible for anyone to know all of them. So.
But you can try to move towards this goal, and if you're not, I don't know how much joint planning will help you. Maybe it will, I don't know, 5%, 10%, it will be more effective, but it can be a lot more. And okay, it's an investment, but on the long term, you need to make sure that you have a business advantage on the market. And I know that most organizations tend to make these investments, so you should make it too. Otherwise, it could be problematic to remain in that market after a while.
And that's a very good point, because this links this whole problem with the larger goal of organizations moving to agility.
Yes.
Why do you move to agility? Not because it's cool, not because it's Scrum,
No.
not because you get a lot of certifications if you want to. You move because you need to have more agility. You need to adapt to the system where it changes. So one example is, the pandemic is coming. You don't know, but you enter lockdown and remote work, and suddenly your users don't want to buy the same things that they wanted to buy 2 months ago. They don't want to spend as much money, or they would need something else. You as an organization, in a context like this, and okay, this is an extreme context, but you can have smaller such changes in your environment. You are able to readjust and adapt to the new environment. And how you do this? Well, if you have cross-functional teams that can work independently and that focus on a value stream, then you can very easily come as a product owner and say, okay, guys, we need to change everything. What we said our strategy was 6 months ago, that's no longer our strategy. This is our new strategy for the next 2 months, because we don't know what will happen in 2 months. So we need to do these things, and let's work in this direction instead of what we were doing.
Yeah, and this approach will definitely make you better in a joint planning as well.
Yeah. So if you have these types of teams that can work separately, independently, you will say, okay, fine. We are now stopping what we did. We are doing something else. Still work. It's still what we are doing. It's nothing new, nothing weird, nothing, It's just that the context changed, and we can adapt to the new thing very easily. Whereas if you have like a steering committee and 20 different people who are managing, project managers and line managers, and you need to reorganize the tasks and move the tasks from one person to another person, and the analyst needs to change
micromanagement
and so on. This whole coordination effort will take you a very long time, and you'll lose the train in the market.
Yeah, it's also an effort. It's a cost. So it's not just that you're not agile. You are putting more money on the table, and you're spending more resources. You're spending more money. You're using more time on things that are just not bringing value. That's the idea. And in a market where things become more and more competitive, that cannot work on a long term.
Yeah. Sooner or later, somebody else who delivers what the users want before they know they want it.
Yes.
They will be better in the market. So this is why we want that ideal state. It's not because it can be a nice place to work for people who fit within this type of context where you expect change and you embrace change. And not everybody does, and it's absolutely normal. But we are also forced to go that way by realities of the market. And that's why we are doing these digital or agile transformations.
Indeed.
All right. Anything else to
add? No. So I just want to summarize that be wary in any type of activities like a joint planning on overhead and on waste. That's very important. Always be wary of them and try to minimize as much as possible.
Okay. Thank you very much, Adi.
Thank you.
For chatting with me about this interesting topic. I hope you found this interesting. As you see, these chats are open to ideas from you, so you can definitely suggest some topics, ask us a question, or things that you noticed in your organization, things that you like to change. We have quite a long experience of working with various types of organizations, from startups to very large organizations, from a number of different industries that include hardware components, that include not only software components, that include proprietary software and custom-made software, and putting things together as blocks taken from different parts of the internet and the marketplace. So I think we can have a lot of interesting conversations around topics that you find challenging. We have to pay our dues to the YouTube algorithm, so please like, share, subscribe, comment, tell other people about this channel and about these chats. We also have a number of conversations with interesting people from software development, and some of them are very, very interesting and inspiring because people have gotten into software development for various reasons, and it's very interesting to learn how their story, how they got into software development, why, and what motivates them. So make sure to watch other videos as well. And tell us if you would like us to discuss a specific topic in these focus chats as we did today. Thank you so much for watching or for listening. And until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.